So I'd first like to welcome everybody this evening, and all members, families and friends who are online for our mental health webinar this evening. I'll first go through a few of the technical points before maybe introducing our guest speaker, Stuart Wilson, this evening. So as this is a webinar format, you will not be able to speak, it's just to limit the interference in that. So you can't speak, ask questions verbally, but there is a Q&A box, which you should see depending on the device you have, Q&A there, which you can ask questions, type in your questions. Now you can ask these at any time throughout the presentation, but what we will do is we will answer these questions at the end. But if anything during the presentation begs a question that you'd like to ask, just put it down and we will cover them all at the end. There may be some limited scope for people to verbally ask questions towards the end as we go through. The presentation itself will take approximately 35 to 40 minutes, and then we will have time at the end to answer those questions. Just to note, we will have another webinar on the history of golf in Ireland on the 26th of November. I'll give a little bit more information on that at the end of this presentation. This year certainly has been one of the strangest and most difficult years in recent memory, the effects of which are being felt by all quarters of society, all ages and all sections. I really hope this seminar will help you and yours to navigate this difficult period with your mental well-being intact. I'll introduce you to Stuart Wilson. Stuart is a mental health advocate, speaker and humanitarian. He's the founder and clinical director of Zest Life Therapeutic Services and founder of Zest for Kids Children's Charity. He is married and has 5 children. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Stuart to go through that presentation.
Thank you so much, Mark. Really appreciate the introduction. It's funny, whenever I speak at any kind of events these days, it tends to be on Zoom. Also, when people introduce me, and thanks, Mark, for the nice introduction, but also when people introduce me, I don't seem to get a lot of credibility when you've worked very hard over the years for qualifications and experience, but I seem to get more credibility for the fact that I have 5 kids of my own on the tail end of that, Mark. So thank you for that. Just to say, my kids are from 27 down to 10. So I have a 27-year-old daughter, 24-year-old son, and then 3 girls who are 17, 13 and 10. So I think from the sector that we're probably speaking to tonight, I've got an idea across all the ages as to some of the difficulties and issues that we might be having. My wife and I started off our relationship many years ago saying that we would love to have 7 kids, and we ended up with 5. And after our experiences of 2 lockdowns, we've actually decided now we only want 3. So if anybody would like me to pop a couple over to you, I can do that at the end of the presentation. I'm joking, of course, but it has been challenging times. And with that in mind, I am going to talk from a mental health perspective about lots of the difficulties that we are encountering at the moment. We have 2 mental health clinics in Dublin, one in Harriscross and one in Churchtown, and we work predominantly with families. So we are seeing a significant impact on the back of COVID-19 on our mental health. If that's okay, I'm going to share my screen with you, and hopefully you should be seeing what I'm clicking into right now, which is that some of the issues that we're going to talk about tonight are what is relevant that's in our homes right now. What are we experiencing? What's happening? I'm going to try and make this presentation as much as possible positive in light of what we can actually do about some of the situations that we're finding ourselves in right now. And some of the things that have been mentioned that people would like to hear about tonight, because I'm very aware that everyone listening in, we've a vast array of different types of situations, from young people through to people my own age, but all sorts of different people with different backgrounds, etc. So I'm going to try and talk across kind of a whole spectrum, if that's possible. But if I don't cover something that you feel, do you know what, we'd love to know more about that, please do put a question in, because I'd be delighted to try and help. If there's not time to answer the questions tonight, I've said to Mark that I'd be very, very happy to connect in with anybody after this, that if you want to send a message or an email through to us, we will cover whatever is relevant for you, should you wish to do that. Some of the issues that you've asked about tonight is that we are seeing a massive surge in our kids' lives, in our young people's lives, and right across the whole spectrum of issues in relation to cyber and technology. And that seems to be causing a lot of difficulties for people. So I will touch on that this evening. We want to look at some of the considerations of the issues that are affecting normal routine within family structures right now. So I will touch on the cyber element of how to work with our younger people. I'm going to touch on coping with stress and anxiety. We've seen surges in that right now, and creating some resilience to deal with what are the life issues that we need to deal with right now. I've added on the end there just a little bit about how to identify and manage drama versus crisis. Now, what I mean by that, there are just the normal stresses and strains and difficulties in our world right now. And they may be made worse through COVID, but some of them are just normal anticipated types of dramas that might fall under the kind of umbrella of, is it COVID, is it not, or COVID related issues. So I am going to talk a little bit about mental health in these times and what we find happening. To start off with, right back in March when this first hits, it was quite incredible, obviously, because this was literally an overnight experience where I remember sitting in my office one day thinking and looking ahead saying, most likely we'll see the schools shut around Easter time and such like. And then literally overnight, we had this impact. I'm very aware that some of you watching tonight were massively impacted by that. Some of you on the front line working as doctors or nurses or in hospitals, or literally working in areas that were supplying food, looking after all of our frontline workers, perhaps in many different areas as well. And life for you completely changed overnight, as well as the schools closing, as well as teachers being affected. So many of you were affected. For those who did literally have to stand up and sprint into the front line, thank you for all that you have done. With the issues around the lockdown, I was very aware that we were going to have a mental health tsunami after literally the earth shaking from the point of view of this issue around COVID-19. So we have seen since lockdown, since the first lockdown, a massive surge in anxiety. We've seen a huge surge in depression and issues that were connected to the home, even areas of domestic violence, addiction-related issues. We've seen rises in all of these areas, and mental health services now literally are bursting at the seams in relation to some of the issues that have been brought to us. So I'm very aware that everyone watching tonight has been affected in different ways. I may not be able to cover tonight all of those issues, but I will speak broadly and then pull it back into some general things we can all do that will help our mental health. I'm going to start off, if it's okay, with our younger folk. And what I mean by that is even right through from the little ones. I'm aware that even my 10-year-old daughter through this, having had lockdown, school, being online doing school, all of those different things. I even remember when there was an opportunity after the initial lockdown for my daughter to go and meet some friends in a park to be able to just connect. She came back really upset one day and I asked her, what's wrong? What was that like? She said, Dad, it was worse to actually go and meet my friend than it was to talk to her online. And I said, why? And she said, because I wasn't able to give her a hug. And for our little ones like that connection, that contact, you remember it, running up and grabbing a hug from your best friend was so important, not just our younger folk, but obviously that was so important for them. So play and social interaction is so physical in our younger people. I'm also very aware that we created this issue around social distancing. I don't like the words and I'm not going to use them tonight if that's okay. Of course, we need physical distancing. I just think the word social distancing starts us off on a very bad kind of way of thinking, because if ever there was a time to have more social interaction, it was through COVID-19. Definitely more social distancing from the point of view of the disease and the virus, but social interaction was terribly important. So I'll talk about physical distancing tonight if that's okay, rather than social distancing. Teenagers in general had, we pushed basically all of our younger folk online, and what we had, I actually speak in quite a lot of schools around cyber and about the effects of cyber on the biology of the body, but also on the effects on social areas as well. So in schools prior to lockdown, I was talking a lot about the effects of cyber and the negative effects. I love cyber, I'm a techie, so I'm not giving out about it, but we were talking about those negative effects on what they can do to young people. And then we were talking about between 4 to 8 hours of screen time that kids would have per day. We put them all online and we brought them up to 11 to 15 hours per day. So you can imagine the difficulties we created as a result of putting our young folk online. Of course we had to, of course there was a reaction, but it does have a price. Some of those issues that we saw, particularly in teenagers, the data that I'm showing you here is from 2010 to 2018, so forgive me, it's a little out of date, but bring COVID into this and all of a sudden it creates some scary statistics, because we saw massive increases in areas of our young girls where they were getting severe reactions to being online so much in negative ways in relationships, but also in social comparisons. Girls tend to girls tend to go online, young girls, this is the age group of particularly around 14 to kind of 18 or 19, going online in the comparison kind of area. And then the final thing that we see a lot of in our younger girls is that fear of missing out, bringing in COVID in there. And then obviously there's a physical issue in relation to that. Different for boys. We don't see boys have the same issues online. We see the boys from a point of view of social connection. We see boys being more negatively affected through gaming or addiction in areas like pornography. When we talk about the kind of middle-aged folk, and I'll put in ages on this because I don't want to embarrass myself, but that may be where anybody watching tonight might be saying, well, my kids are kind of a little bit more grown up. I know, but you're missing out hugely on other areas for things, for instance, being able to take downtime, holiday time, golf tee time, being able to get out in the course and socialize and connect with people. That's huge in this age group. And not only that, but also probably if we have underlying issues or health conditions, being terribly upset and anxious about potentially contacting somebody with COVID-19 or having it ourselves. We see this a lot as well in our older folk, where there is significant concern around contracting COVID. And also that really, I think it was actually quite a traumatic thing to see. I was like this with my own parents through lockdown. My parents are in their 80s right now. And to have to see those signs, I can remember it on Mother's Day, where we were visiting and literally putting a hand up against a glass, pane of glass out of a back door window. They were terribly upsetting times, terribly difficult times for people. And for anybody here watching tonight who has grandchildren, you know exactly what I mean. How difficult has that been for you? So there could be underlying issues that are health related, but not able to mix with families and grandkids. It's just not right. And it's also leads to a lot of loneliness and upset. You might be watching tonight and saying, I'm not any of those categories. I actually just feel myself being very alone during COVID. I had quite a kind of middle-aged people contacting me during that saying, what can I do? You know, because there's lots of people getting help in various different ways. I don't fit into any of those categories. I'm actually in my own flat or apartment and I'm alone. And I feel so incredibly isolated and disconnected. There's a great book by a gentleman called Dr. Dan Siegel called The Whole Brain Child. He talks about the neuroscience. He's actually an American psychiatrist, but he talks about the neuroscience and the effects on the brain in relation to understanding neuroscience and low mood, depression, and anxiety. And he actually says something which I think is quite interesting. He says that at the basis of every type of mental health disorder, or behind every mental health disorder, we can usually see loneliness, isolation, and disconnect, which is quite upsetting when you think about that. However, he says that the answer to that, which is beautiful to hear from a psychiatrist, to be perfectly honest, is the answer to that is love and connection. So at a time during COVID when things were very, very difficult and people were feeling very alone, how hard was that? So if you experienced that, I'm so sorry that was your circumstances. I want to focus in on some of the things that we can now do, knowing the things that have impacted us in our mental wellness as well as physical wellness. I'm a great believer in focus. I'm a great believer in looking at what is one small thing that I can do that will make a big difference. So I want to look at that, and I want to ask you, almost ask a question to everybody, but also to myself in this. What small change can I make that's going to make an impact this year? You know, for instance, the average screen time that we knew in young people, 11, 15-year-olds pre-COVID was 5 to 7 hours. Then it went up to 11 to 14 hours after this. You know, I want to look at, well, what can I do differently with my young people in my home now that we're looking at maybe December 2nd and some restrictions being lifted? How can I address those issues where too much cyber is not good for them? What can I do about thinking about new hobbies or new interests? How can I think, this sounds unusual if you read it out up there, but how can I think about our mental health like we would our dental health? I'll say that again. How can we impact our mental health or think of our mental health as we would our dental health? I don't know about you, but I for years was crazy about making sure my kids clean their teeth every evening before they went to bed. I'd check with them. Did you do your teeth? Did you clean your teeth? We used to have that comment, you know, teeth, toilet, into bed, I'll be up in a minute, you know, or maybe that was just my house. And every morning before they would leave to go to school, I'd check, have you cleaned your teeth before you go to school? And there were times, if I'm being very honest, that I even dragged a young person from the car to say, come on, quick, back in, clean your teeth before you go to school. The reality is we check in with our dental health twice a day, every day. How often do you or I check in with our mental health? How often has there been, and I'm challenged by this myself, where I'm actually saying to myself, how often do I check in on my kids to say, how's your mental health? How are you getting on? How are things? And when I start to look at that and to impact that, not just with my kids, with my wife, with my parents, with my siblings, when I check in with them on stuff like that, it's a big question, because you might get some answers. And quite often the answers are not what we thought, because quite often people will put on a mask or a face to say, I'm doing fine, everything is good here. When in reality, if we ask the question, how is your mental health? Quite often the return is, it's very difficult right now. I'm finding things really hard. If we believe what Dr. Dan Siegel says, that the answer to any of these underlying issues in our mental health is connection and love, there's lots we can therefore do about it. I do believe that we need to try to create the conditions in which we can have a good year this year, because I do believe we're under extreme pressure with all of what's happening. However, we can do life well. And how do we keep things in order? What can we do to try to keep things in order under the set of circumstances that we find ourselves in? What are these things? Okay, I'm going to start with real basics, if that's okay. I'm going to talk about what I believe fundamentally about life is that we come into this world with nothing, we leave with nothing other than the incredible relationships, hopefully, that we have created amongst those who are the key people in our lives, the key people who we love, our family, our friends, our connections. If I believe that the quality of my life is made up by the quality of my relationships, which I hope you'll agree with me on, if that's true, well, then I've got to be able to believe that the quality of my relationships is made up by the quality of my communication. Now, I don't know about you, but during lockdown, I found myself in a lot more what I call red zones. Red zones are reaction zones: mayhem, upset, anger, freaked out, anxious, fighting with the kids, getting short with my wife, whatever. Maybe that's just me. And you're thinking to yourself, I don't want to live in his house. But there were a lot more red zones, because there was a lot more uncertainty. Uncertainty breeds anxiety. And as a result of that, those red zones became difficult. I wanted to and started to create what I call more green zones. Green zones are places of growth where we can actually have good conversations. And I'm going to talk about those zones in just a little bit as we progress, if that's okay. There's three basics on which we have to kind of almost hang our hat for all other coping mechanisms or skills in relation to assisting our own mental health. And the three of them I've mentioned here are sleep, nutrition, and exercise. Now, you watching this might say, well, there's other areas too. Yes, there is. Sorry, I'm really generalizing here and keeping it very simple for all of us. The basics are this: our sleep is essential for our mental health as well as our physical health. And one of the biggest issues we have seen happen during COVID has been lack of sleep, sleep being broken, sleep hygiene being distorted. We have literally a young group of people, probably from, if I was to put ages on it, roughly speaking, from about 15 to 25, where sleep deprivation is a huge issue right now. Sleep routine has fallen out and has become very, very difficult. We've seen a huge surge in visits to GPs that I would work with in relation to sleeping tablets to be able to get sleep back into routine. So sleep is essential, and we'll talk a little bit about that why in a few moments. Nutrition, obviously, and I don't know about you, but I found myself grazing on rubbish a lot more through COVID than we would do eating correctly and properly, even from the point of view of hydration for water during COVID and during lockdown. So the three basics, and finally exercise. I'm not even talking about exercise from the point of view of cardiovascular, getting to the gym, going running, pumping it. I'm not even talking about those things. I'm even just talking about this from a mental health capacity. Mental health walking. That's kind of like you're walking the dog type of speed, but getting out and strolling and connecting are the three kind of basics that we put everything else upon, if that's okay for me to suggest it that way. So if those basics are in place, then we can move on to some of the things I'm going to talk about now. But those are three essentials. Now, if you're struggling in those areas, please don't ever be afraid to ask for help, whether it's with your GP, whether it's with a therapist, because some simple structures and guides can get you back into being on, like I mentioned earlier, the correct order of things. Because if you're exhausted, there's very little else that we can do that's actually going to help you in relation to coping with anxiety or anything else like that. So sleep, nutrition, and exercise. So if we look at it this way, how can we therefore try to thrive during a difficult time like lockdown or even post-lockdown? And I'm going to talk about these words. The first word being focus. We need to be able to look very closely at what we can do rather than what we can't do. Because I know during COVID, there were so many things we were told, both from a national perspective, but also from a physical perspective, what we couldn't do. And very quickly, our focus went into what we couldn't do. I want to, if it's okay, to suggest we put our focus into the things that we can do. Where our focus goes, our energy flows, whether that's positive or negative. You know this because if you hang around with people who are being negative, very quickly the conversation goes that way and our emotions follow. If we're connecting with people who are being positive, whether it's about anything, but it's being positive, our energy tends to flow into that space as well. So getting into focusing on things like good routines around what we focus on is not just a good idea, it's absolutely essential during difficult times like this. I was just mentioning to Mark earlier on before we started that I actually worked and connected in Uganda through Ebola. And in that crisis, some of the routines that I saw people do within some of the villages in Uganda was quite incredible. People were becoming incredibly focused on, of course, physical distancing to ensure that the virus didn't spread, but also they were very faith-based. They put a lot of their energy into almost into praise and into worship and into helping families around them and trying to make sure that people had enough food and all sorts of things that were just really, really positive. I heard one of my friends told me this, and it's quite true. He was literally affected by Ebola within his family, but he said that there was never a time in northern Uganda, there was never a time where they sang more than during Ebola. I just found that fascinating. There was never a time that they sang more than during Ebola. There's good learning in that for us. I want to talk back to a younger version of me. I think I was about 20 years of age. It's a long time ago now, over 30 years. But I remember walking through the city centre in Dublin one time. And as I was walking down the street towards Grafton Street, I used to work in the city, I saw a guy in front of me just about to cross the street. As he crossed the street, his wallet fell out of his back pocket. He was starting to run. He had picked something out and his wallet fell out of his back pocket. I went up, picked up his wallet, followed him. I was a good, honest guy in those days. And I followed him and I just tapped him on the shoulder and I handed him back his wallet. I said, you dropped this just down the road. And he turned around and he looked at me like I had two heads and he said, wow, thanks so much. And he said, gosh, I'd have been lost if I didn't have that. It's got my passport, it's got this and it's that and whatever. And I was like, yeah, no problem at all. Then he said to me, can I give you, he was going to hand me some euros, whatever. And I said, no, not at all. Listen, just delighted to be able to do that. And he said, no, please, I insist. And he went to hand it to me. And I said, no, I tell you what, if you want to put some money into a charity box or something, please feel free to do that. But no, I'm good here. Glad you got your wallet back. And I walked off. Anyway, we went down to the next. I got a surge. I realize now looking back, but a psychological head on my shoulders, I realize now looking back, I got a surge of what's called oxytocin into my hormone that's produced, which is, we quite often call the oxytocin hormone, we call it the cuddle hormone or the love hormone. It's produced significantly when women have babies. It's produced in we also get it from socially bonding. So as I walked down the street, an elderly lady touched me on the shoulder. It's just saying my internet connection has gone a little slow, so I hope it's back now. An elderly lady came up behind me and she just touched me on the shoulder and she just said to me, I saw what you giving that wallet back to that young man out down the road there. And I said, oh, that's yes, of course. And she just turned around and she said, that's really nice. That's a really kind thing that you did. I actually nearly filled up with tears, if I'm being very honest with you. And I was like, wow, thanks so much for saying that. What I realized is the oxytocin that I got from giving him back his wallet, the oxytocin that he got from getting his wallet back, he probably went on and maybe put his money in a charity box. There was oxytocin created there. This woman walking down the street had oxytocin produced. She talked to me about it. She was producing oxytocin and I got another surge of oxytocin. I went home and told my parents that night and we all got another dose of oxytocin. The reality is that oxytocin, the love hormone, oxytocin is infectious. So if we're talking about times of virus, disease, and infection, there's a good infection, and it's called oxytocin. It's called love. It's called connection. It's called acceptance that we can experiment with. I was really disturbed in March time when we're here in mental health services, so we were working through COVID. But when I went out for little walks around where I work in Churchtown, and I'd see people crossing the road when they'd see me. Now that's fine, I understand that because physical distancing needs to be over 2 meters. But I also saw lots of behavioral changes in people where their heads or hoods might go up and their heads would go down, and people would stare at their feet a lot. There'd be no interaction. And I'd love if you want to put some of what I'm talking tonight to the test when you go out and go for a walk in the very near future. And that is to do this. Keep our heads up and smile at everybody. Say hello and connect, because it is actually infectious. It is impossible to not smile and connect back. And when we do that, it becomes infectious to everyone else. That person spreads that and connects that. So if there's anything we want to spread right now, let's spread a little bit of joy, a little bit of happiness, and a little bit of love. I'm going to talk to us, if it's okay now, about what to put our focus on, which are the coping strategies to put our focus on after the three things: the sleep, the nutrition, the exercise, etc., that assists us. And I'm going to give us, if it's okay tonight, 4 categories, which I'd love you to maybe write down or even just think about. That might be helpful. And these are important because they're not just coping strategies where they're good ideas. These are actually huge categories that will bring down our cortisol levels. Our cortisol is our stress hormone. So when we're going through COVID, when it's difficult like it is now, our cortisol levels rise. When our cortisol levels rise, they affect our mood, or our mood is a hormone called serotonin in our central nervous system. So our moods tend to come down when our anxiety goes up. And that's a balance every day. The categories that I'm talking about here will assist our cortisol levels, our stress levels to reduce, and for our serotonin, our moods to increase. And they go literally hand in hand each day. So I'm going to focus on the first one, if that's okay. Now, I mentioned earlier on about walking, and I said to us that it is actually walking from the point of view of mental health. I'm not talking about power walking. That's great for us. I'm not talking about running. That's great for us. That's our cardiovascular system. It's brilliant. It's really good to get physically fit. But what I am talking about most especially is our mental health and mental health walking. And that can be a stroll. Some of the best things we could possibly do when we are feeling stressed, when we are feeling a little bit low in mood perhaps, is to get ourselves out into nature. I discovered something through COVID I did not know. And that is this: if I go anywhere to, say for instance, to a cafe to have a coffee, do you remember those places we used to go to? If I was to go to a cafe and have a cup of coffee and to bring a notebook and a pen with me, I would write a to-do list. I would write down things that I needed to do or should be doing. The reality is that would get me more stressed. I discovered something through COVID, and that is that if I go to somewhere where there's water, where there's, to Dunleary Pier, where you can go for a walk around water, to a lake in a forest or something like that where there's water, and if I sit down with a book and a pen, I write dreamy things. It totally changes my mindset because I'm around nature. Now, some of you might say, that's me in going for a forest walk. That's me in going to the park. Fantastic. Find what it is where you can walk, not just walking, but find where it is where you can walk, where it has a significant impact on making your mood change. In other words, your serotonin increases. If you don't know what that place is, please look for it and please find it, as well as keeping physically fit, that you are able to find where you can walk and what makes a big difference. I had some teenage young people recently talking to me about sleep issues and how they were having difficulty sleeping. One of the things that they'd like to do quite late in the evening is maybe talk to a boyfriend or girlfriend or connect with a friend on communication. And one of the things I make a suggestion to do is at nighttime, if they're doing that, is to go for a walk and make it an audio conversation, not a visual conversation, not on FaceTime, but on audio. Rather than the phone up to your ear, to have it on an earpiece, to be able to have a chat and walk, as opposed to sedate lying on a bed and talk, because it has a significant impact on your mental wellness if you walk and talk rather than be sedate and talk. The second thing is face-to-face communication. Your brain and my brain is the only organ in our body that regulates from external to the brain. Every other organ regulates from within. Our brain regulates from external to the body. So what we know by that is that by talking to another human being, your brain regulates. In other words, your serotonin levels increase. It brings up, you might say, well, talking to the wrong people can bring your stress levels up. Yes, that's true. Some people can make you feel like you've had 50 cups of coffee if you've been talking to them. I hear you. But generally speaking, if we are having direct conversations face to face, not online. I'll talk about why in a moment. Face to face brings down our cortisol levels, increases our serotonin, and that has a significant impact again on our mental wellness. So if you just align that with walking and talking, it's an ideal way and a phenomenal way. Any of you who are, evening walkers or morning walkers, you know this to be true. We come back from a walk and a chat with a friend, and we are significantly feeling better. With that in mind, I want to suggest our next thing. Now, you might say to me, read, having time to read right now. Why is reading so impactful? When we read a hard copy of a book, one of the first things I ever do when I pick up a book is actually to hold it and to smell it. Maybe I'm just old-fashioned, but I love the smell of a book. It alerts all my senses. And when we look at reading as a tool for mental health, for focusing around mental health, it's the category of reading. It doesn't matter what we're reading. It doesn't matter if it's magazines, following pictures and comic books for younger people. It's phenomenally helpful for us. You know that when you're reading a book, not only are you reading what's on the page, they're not just words, but your brain goes into a place of imagination. Your brain follows the story. Your brain connects into imagination and creative outcomes for what might happen next, or what's happening in the mind of the person who's writing. So it actually stimulates areas of the brain that produce things like imagination and therefore problem solving. Problem solving and imagination is an area that produces resilience. How do we know this to be true? Even things like in our younger people, where you might say they don't particularly like to read, sometimes even just lying down at nighttime and having a story with my 10-year-old can be where I read, she reads, and we take a little bit of goes or turns at that, and she'll follow what I'm reading and then maybe take over for a while. It develops the brains, and it really helps the central nervous system to calm down. This section that I'm going to talk about is about writing and being creative. Now, any of you watching this tonight who are creatives, artists, anybody who is a creative, you know this is brilliant for you. So anything that alerts that area of creativity in our brain brings down cortisol levels and massively increases your serotonin levels. So if you're an artist, you know this to be true. If you're sculpting, you know this to be true. It assists the brain to become a problem solver, and that imagination assists the brain to become creative. And creativity and solution focus produces resilience. So again, we know that those are really important areas for our mental wellness. We need to minimize some things, and I'm going to skip through this quite quickly, but it's important. We need to minimize negativity right now, because I don't know about you, throughout the first part of March, I was stuck to news and I was stuck to what was happening. I also got stuck to numbers, which I found really upsetting. And for anybody here who has lost anyone through COVID, first of all, I'm so terribly sorry. It's such a difficult thing, but the numbers was so negative to impact us in an anxiety perspective, and to produce fear. And we're not hearing some of the good news of people who did get well or did get better. So I'd strongly recommend, forgive the typo there, but I would strongly recommend trying to focus on any of the positive news. And I used to love when the news finished every evening with a positive story, something to alert us to a great thing that was happening in the world. It just doesn't seem to happen so much anymore. And whether it's Brexit or COVID or even the elections, it's so negative. And what we've seen has been so difficult in so many different ways. So please minimize that. Also, I would say to you, if you're a parent, don't talk too much about these things. You know, try and talk about some of the positivity that you've heard online about survivors of COVID or positive things that are happening in the neighborhood. When times get dark, light can shine in. And that's where we hear of amazing people doing amazing things. And really, we need to talk about those. In many terms, we need to minimize the amount of time that we're spending online, because it massively affects our brain. The brain areas that it affects is this reptilian part of the brain, particularly in our younger people. In our adults over 25s or so watching this, you'll see that the purple part of the brain, or the blue part there, is the cortex. That's the rational thinking part of the brain and the decision-making part of the brain. Our younger people are working out of the reptilian part of the brain that you see there, which basically is reactional and emotional. And we create a lot of our own issues in our emotions in our younger people by anxiety and pressure and stress. And we're going to talk about how to deal with that. We've mentioned cortisol, we've mentioned serotonin, and we've mentioned this final one that I'm coming on to is our sleep hormone, melatonin. We know that our cortisol levels at nighttime, if they're too high, will stop our melatonin at times, or delay our melatonin, which is our sleep hormone, in rising. And when that happens, our kids are not tired enough, or we are not tired enough from to actually go asleep and to get into our deep sleep and our REM sleep and our dream sleep that gets rid of all the toxins in our body, in our brain, reduces our cortisol, and also cleanses all the brain cells and replenishes all the brain cells that the body has used up during the day. That's why we're seeing so many difficulties in sleep. What we do know is that devices in general stimulate the brain, and the backlight on them produces cortisol in our central nervous system in the brain after we've had too much access to them. So brain stimulation at nighttime from devices, folks, an hour before you go to bed, not only isn't a good idea, it actually will affect your sleep. And we know that that's from devices with any backlight. I'm not talking about TV, it's not quite the same, but I am talking about any devices with a backlight. That problem is it produces red zone behaviors. What are those red zones? We have red zone thoughts, and that's fine. We can have red zone thoughts, which are negative thoughts, upsetting thoughts. We can have red zone emotions, which is to be stressed or frustrated or whatever. And they often produce red zone behaviors, like being angry or stressed, harsh words, frustration. The answer to what we need to try and do, if we can, is to connect into what I call green zones, and green zone behaviors that are actually choices that then eliminate red zone emotions, feelings like being upset, frustrated, and angry. What are they? So I've listed them here for you. Face-to-face communication, number 1. Gentle exercise, number 2. Healthy eating, we've touched on already. Connection, communication, talking, having green zone conversations when we feel frustrated with the kids as opposed to red zones. Good actions, having a kind heart. One thing that I've brought into my home, which has been brilliant during COVID and even before, I used to do this a lot with my wife, where we'd have couch time every day after dinner. It's a great thing to be able to play with, but couch time is simply where my wife and I were married for years, and we decided that we would bring this thing called couch time in after dinner, literally for 15 minutes after dinner, where we sit down and the kids are not allowed to interrupt us. It's just mom and dad catch up time, because we're like passing ships in the night. We didn't get chances with 5 kids to actually converse, homeworks and busyness and preparation for school the next day. So we did that, and I gotta say, it was one of the most amazing things we brought into our family. The kids got used to it and they love it, and they'd actually make things for it, like baking or stuff, and make us tea and whatever. But couch time became really important in our world. It also is something I do with our kids regularly to check in with them. I said earlier on, most of the time, if you say to your kids, hey, do you want to spend time with me? They're like, no, whatever, I want to spend time with my friends. In reality, if the kids have anything that's upsetting them in red zone feelings or emotions, green zone offers, you might say, well, I'll offer. Green zone offers of, hey, come on sit on the couch with me. I want to have a chat with you for a few minutes. Green zone offers, even if they don't take us up on them, register in the brain with oxytocin. So just making a bid for your kid, making an offer of a green zone impacts with oxytocin. What we're saying is things like, I'd love to spend time with you for a few minutes. You'll fancy having a catch up on the couch. Watch what happens when we offer those things. It immediately impacts. It reduces anxiety. It promotes connectivity. It increases serotonin. So couch time, bring it into your family time if you can. It's very beneficial. I've been asked to talk a little bit just around how do we communicate about COVID at home, particularly with our young people, and what can we do? And I want to just add this in, where we need to communicate factually and not fearfully. What are the physical distancing things we need to do? What's the hand washing? What's the sneeze etiquette? What's all the different things? Give them the facts and hold it there. We don't go into number crunching. We don't go into conversations about anything else, what it could be like, what it might be like, what it should be like. Keeping it factual and leaving it there as much as is possible, and then showing them what they can do to try and help the balance of the home, whether that's a chore or two, or different things that might be beneficial to them in their mental wellness, walk, talk, read, and write, or maybe having conversations about how we can get sleep routines back in place since lockdown, and how difficult that might have been. Keeping them away from the fear news, and definitely promoting happy stories. I set up a WhatsApp group amongst my family, and we promote, and we just send around fun stuff, happy stuff, funny stuff that makes everyone have a little bit of a laugh, not negative stuff into it. How do we need to, what can we teach our families? So I'm going to skip through this quite quickly, and this will be available for you afterwards. We can certainly send the prepresentation around if anyone wants to have this for themselves. Slow down. I've learned through COVID, slow down, be patient, I'm trying, and it's a difficult thing with 5 kids, but I'm trying to be present more of the time. This sounds unusual, promote boredom. What do I mean? You know, I've a young lady in my age, she's 10 years of age, and she came through me not so long ago saying something about, you know, I'm bored, I need something to do. And I did what I promised I'd never do. I said exactly probably what my parents said. I said, I've plenty of things that you can do, and I have a list of chores for you. She disappeared quite quickly. And I went to call her for dinner later on, and she couldn't come to dinner because I said, why, what are you doing? Come on, it's time for dinner. And she said, I can't come to dinner. I'm behind the couch at the moment having a conversation with a dinosaur. The reality is boredom produces creativity. In young kids particularly, it produces imagination. It does the same in adults. When we're bored, we find things to do. And when we produce that imagination, one of the things that happened in our house as well was that one of the kids, in fact, 2 of them ended up, I got a delivery from Amazon, and they said they were bored. Next minute, I found them both producing these huge, took everything out of the boxes, but these massive big boxes, had colored in stuff, and were using the boxes as cars around the house. Self-control and self-discipline is essential. What do I mean? You may find, like everyone else has found, that you were sitting out in the back garden on a Wednesday evening at 3 o'clock in the afternoon having a gin and tonic. Self-control and self-discipline during these times is essential. Being wise about our alcohol intake and even prescription drugs, etc. All of the different things that we know can create addiction and difficulty are important things to look at to try and control and keep a balance on. And these things do take time, and learning about, we mentioned here about relationships and stuff, that is important. Even our young people, I find that my late teenagers at the moment, and even my early 20s are struggling with relationships right now. So I'm listening to them in couch time, having conversations with them, not telling them what to do, because guess what? They don't listen. But I am hearing them, and I'm trying to ask them, what do you think you can do about this? Some of them are coming up with creative solutions to help each other through COVID. Not mom and dad are telling them what to do. They're coming up with creative solutions. And that's actually amazing, because that's resilience. Understanding that the most important thing in the relationship in my house and in your house and in anybody's is granny and granddad's relationship, or is mom and dad's relationship. Keep that tight and keep it united. And even silly little things at the moment, I may have been seen out recently doing this, where you can't have a date night. We have a date night every Thursday. If you can't have a date night because you can't go out, it's finding things to be able to do. I've been seen in car parks outside our local takeaways with plates, and that's our date night these days. So learning to focus on things that are actually a little bit silly or a little bit creative, but are actually good. And I've mentioned here in relation to the increases in anxiety, that nerves and anxiety have the same symptoms, and that anxiety is normal. It's okay to be struggling just a little bit, but it's also okay to ask for help. So we lend our kids an ear, and we have to have a relationship with them before we can challenge them. So I'm going to overview what we've talked about, if that's okay. We need to decrease the stimulation in our homes right now, rather than increase it and have homes that are too busy. We need to boundary devices and to create sensible norms, particularly for our 16-year-olds and under. Slowing down our homes, adapting into the three things I talked about, being the sleep, the nutrition, and in relation to exercise, putting the coping strategies on top of that are the categories. They can be broad, but the categories of talk, walk, read, and write, because that leads to good and proper sleep. And if we can do all of those things, we're stimulating our homes to be homes where we benefit and we manage through what is, let's be honest, a very difficult time. But we do focus on the positive side of what we can do, because it is possible to do that. So guys, I'm going to leave it there. I hope that some of what we talked about has been helpful or beneficial. We may not have covered everything for everybody, so please forgive me for that. If we haven't, I don't want to sell you short. Please contact us. Come in contact with me. Mark, I'm sure we'll be happy to be able to give out our contact details. They are actually there as well if you so wish. And we will be delighted to be able to assist anybody who might be struggling in any area, particularly if it's family related or connected. So I'll hold there, and if there's any questions, I'll be quiet for a moment. And thank you so much for joining us this evening. I'll try to keep it to as close to the promise of 40 minutes as is possible. So Mark, I'll hand back to you.
Stuart, thank you very much indeed. That was a very interesting presentation. I hope that our members and attendees found it very useful. We do have questions coming in here thick and fast. So we'll start with Gary Goldsmith. This goes back to your point about walking. He was asking, with or without music?
Oh, great. Gary, you must be a musician. That's wonderful. Music's amazing. And it's a fantastic tool to be able to calm our central nervous system and relax. So anybody who's a musician knows, if you're playing instruments, it has an amazing impact. So yes, it's very important. Music, while walking, is excellent because you're listening, it's audio, it's not visual. So definitely some of those walking and music go together. That's absolutely fine. Gary, it tends to be the visual impact of screens. That's the issue, not the audio impact. So for our younger people to, go for a walk, listen to a podcast, that's absolutely fine. The walking is excellent. That's why I said earlier on about being able to walk and listen, or walk and talk to even a partner, a girlfriend, or a boyfriend. They're all fine. But music, Gary, as an actual tool for mental health, is an excellent tool. If you play a musical instrument, you know that to be true as well.
The next question we have from Kay Kennedy. Does reading on a Kindle at night time affect sleep?
Brilliant question. Okay, so there's lots of research in this, Kay, and there's lots of things that you can have a little look on your own. I'll generalize. Kindles in general are a little bit like TVs, because the really good Kindles don't have a backlight, and some of them have backlights but have a filter on the backlight. So everyone is different. I don't know how new yours is. They don't tend to produce or have an overproduction of cortisol. However, they don't produce serotonin. So science would say that the brain is stimulated by a book because it alerts all the senses, and therefore a hard copy of a book is still probably better than a Kindle, but a Kindle is not necessarily negative. It doesn't have a cortisol impactful increase. Now, the scientists watching this tonight are going to have a little bit of trouble with what I've just said there, because different Kindles have different impacts. So forgive me, because that is generalizing, but there's nothing as good as a hard copy of a book, if that's okay to say, Kay.
We've a related question from an anonymous attendee. What are good boundaries for kids and devices, 9 and 11-year-olds in particular?
Good boundaries for kids with devices. Okay, so generally speaking, in that age group at the moment, we're seeing a significant impact, and Mark, we're seeing a younger impact. We're seeing, so for instance, when the effects of screens on kids in younger ages, there's science to show that it has more of an impact on development of the brain. So there's a lot of neuroscience behind that, and you can search that yourselves. But we do know that boundaries around that are important. Generally speaking, I'm overgeneralizing now, but generally speaking, the brain can adapt to about 2 hours of screen time per day before it starts to go into potentially overproduction of cortisol. So 2 hours a day during the day is fine. The big impact, Mark, is nighttime. And therefore, I'm a techie. I love technology, and I use technology all of the time. But you and I know this to be true. We don't need science to tell us. We know this. If I'm on my screens like this, Mark, till say 11 o'clock at night, and then I try to go to bed because I've had 2 or 3 hours, maybe doing a presentation or something, it's impossible. I know my cortisol levels are through the roof. What does that mean? That means if I go to bed, my melatonin won't rise significantly. I won't get to sleep properly. I'll be jumpy. I'll be fidgety. What we need to do, and what we realize, or now what I realize, is if I go for a 20-minute gentle mental health walk, after having done all that work on the computer, I can literally feel my cortisol levels coming down. I can feel like my central nervous system is relaxing a little bit, and you learn to kind of listen to your body when it comes to that. Anybody who's from a medical perspective knows this to be true. So boundaries are important with our young people. Late night usage of screens is, particularly an hour and a half before bedtime, folks, is just don't do it. Pull back from screen usage. TV's not so bad, Kindle's not so bad because it's not producing excess cortisol, but it's still nothing better than the walk, talk, reads, and write, Mark, to be able to assist serotonin lifting. Serotonin and melatonin are beautifully rise together. Cortisol, science will say, can impact melatonin rising, sleep hormone rising. So if there's good boundaries to have, I would suggest for our anonymous attendee to be able to say, keep it low at nighttime, pull it back for an hour or two before bedtime, and you'll see your kids sleep better. Get phones out of rooms. Don't have them in there. Have a central area if you can. But mums and dads watching this, you can't do that unless you do that first. It's got to be a house rule, I find, or else kids don't really kind of go with it. They don't tend to believe it. They kind of go, what's good for you is only good for me. So I'm trying as much as we can to lead by example.
Do you feel that in the current situation, obviously meeting face to face, you've mentioned, is far better, but both for adults and kids, is meeting online or doing Zoom meetings with your friends, is that beneficial? Is that a stress reducer?
Yeah, for sure, Mark. It's great to be able to connect, because the social connectivity really helps us with our own feelings of loneliness or upset. So it's brilliant to be able to connect. And listen, we've seen inventive things happening online with Zoom meetings, where people are having Zoom meeting dinner parties and stuff like that. It's great. And technology is wonderful. Please don't take the message tonight that I'm dissing technology. I'm a techie. I love it. So what I am saying is that viewing it for long and extended periods of time can interfere with our mental wellness. So if we know that, it's not that the technology is a bad thing, but that we use it in a productive way. So it might be that rather than just staring at the screen all night, we're doing something like, being able to I saw somebody do a baking thing online with 4 or 5 friends, and they all made the same thing, and there was a bit of fun attached to that. But they were baking, so they were doing stuff. They weren't just actually centered on looking at the screen. They were active doing other things. One of my daughters recently went on with one of her friends who she was terribly missing, went on a treasure hunt. So she actually got out in nature. They had FaceTime on, but they weren't looking at the screen all the time. They were running around, you go and find a leaf, you go and find a branch, and they were all gathering things that they could do together. So if we can use technology to support our life rather than take over our life, I think that's what I'm trying to get across as a message tonight.
Thank you. I have a question here, a simple question, but probably not a simple answer. What about loneliness?
Yeah. Oh, thank you. And I suppose that's an area that I probably haven't covered enough of tonight. I did touch on what we talked about with Dan Siegel, talking about at the basis of a lot of our mental health issues is isolation and loneliness. And that the reaction to that is love. What can we do? Simple, for instance, Mark, I was watching the Late Late Show last Friday night. I don't know if anybody saw it. I was actually a bit tired and I'm going to be honest, a bit grumpy, a bit run down, a bit from just a long day. And I think the highlight of my weekend was going to be the Late Late Show. Let's be honest, that was what I was looking forward to. So while I was watching it, I came across something, and I'm not promoting anything, guys. This is not, I won't even tell about names or anything like that, but just it got my heart. It made my heart warm when I heard this. I was thinking of my parents, and my father hadn't been well, and I was thinking of my kids were terribly upset and difficulty about not seeing grandpa and grandmom. And this idea came up, which was you can buy seeds and you can write to this company and they'll do things like send the seeds, maybe sunflower seeds, to grandpa, and to say to him, to my granddad, who I love and miss so much, and the pot will go with it or whatever, you plant these seeds, I get the same seeds, the seeds will be sent to me as well and to the granddaughter or whatever, and we'll come on FaceTime tomorrow, we'll plant the seeds together and we'll come on to each other every day and talk about how our seeds are growing. First of all, I just thought the sentiment of that was absolutely phenomenal. At a time where it's so lonely for people, it's a beautiful thing to be able to do. So small things, if we are feeling lonely, have big impact, like we said earlier on. So my daughter connecting in with what she thought was a lovely way to connect with grandpa because he's sick and she's lonely and she's missing him, immediately puts our focus onto what Dan Siegel talked about. The opposite of loneliness is connection and love. So thank you for that comment about what about loneliness, because you're absolutely right. But remember that the opposite to loneliness is connection and is love. You might say, if someone's watching this tonight, I don't have those grandkids. I don't have those connections that you're talking about. And this is where I'm reaching out to people regularly and saying, you don't have to have that contact upon you to connect and feel loved. Your oxytocin produces when you also love. So if you're lonely or if we're sad, one of the things we can do to assist ourselves with that is to reach out to somebody else in love. Because as soon as we do that and we connect with another human being, we produce oxytocin. The love hormone kicks in and we feel better about ourselves.
Thank you. I just have a question here from Libby, just in regard to what Dan Siegel's book is called.
Oh yeah, sorry. I don't think I mentioned the name of it. He's written a lot of books, but the one that I'm kind of talking about more so tonight refers to family and young people mostly. It's Dr. Dan Siegel and Dr. Tina Payne, Payne, and the book is called The Whole Brain Child. The Whole Brain Child. It's a great read. It's a neuroscience type book, but it's in layman's terms, which I think is very interesting and fascinating.
Okay, and an anonymous attendee, I wake at 6 a.m. recently. If I put on a radio, then I'm back to sleep for another 2 hours. Is this bad for my brain or my hearing?
No, it's wonderful. The audio again is back to what we were kind of talking about. If you were getting up at 6 a.m. and going directly to your screen and watching a movie, that would be different because it starts to produce cortisol. However, cortisol is really important. In fact, in the morning time, your brain produces cortisol to wake us up. So when you pull back the curtains in the morning, your brain produces cortisol. And cortisol is literally saying to your brain, wake up, it's time to get at your day. The difficulty with cortisol being in an overproduction of it is nighttime. So if you're going to bed at nighttime with an overproduction of cortisol because we've been on screens for too long, our brain is going, wake up, but we're actually trying to sleep. So in answer to that question, audio, amazing. Listening to the radio, gosh, it's one of the most fantastic things to do for calming our central nervous system. It's up there, Mark, with music.
Okay. I think we've gone through most of the questions, but I'll give, if anybody wants to ask a last one, I'll ask one probably on behalf of the members. I know there has been research on the benefits, obviously the physical benefits are there, but the mental health benefits of golf itself, the research is starting to come out there that it provides incredible health benefits and even prolongs life. Do you have any insight into we've talked about walking, but walking while hitting golf shots and obviously the interaction there?
Mark, so sport in general. I'm a sporty. I have a background in rugby, in golf, in cricket, and I love sports. So I'm a big sports person. Yeah, golf is phenomenally good. We know that. So when you get out on the golf course, it's, you know, and I know. Now, unless you're playing golf with me, then it's stressful. But you and I know that if you're getting out on the golf course and you're hitting a few balls, the reality is not just the golf, it's not just the exercise, which of course is phenomenal. It's also the competition, the fun, the banter, the connection, the if it's kind of if you're having a good day, it's that level of oxytocin. Also, if you're having a hole in one, it's the brain's reward system called dopamine that hits us in, or a good shot. So sport in general is phenomenally good, and golf as a sport absolutely is right up there for assisting ourselves with mental health, guys. It doesn't really get much better.
Okay, there's no other questions, so we might wrap it up with probably a final thought. You know, if somebody is feeling low, you know, does connecting with their GP or therapy, I mean, do these methods work?
What I would always say to people is, if you are feeling low, some of the things that we've talked about tonight, I hope will stimulate some ideas. That's really what we're doing, Mark. We're trying to talk about the issues around mental health. I'm just so grateful to Edmondstown Golf Club that we're taking mental health so incredibly seriously for your members, your members' families. This is something we need to talk about. So I'm really appreciate the platform tonight to be able to do this. It's so amazing. Yes is the answer. If we are feeling low, one of the most important things, and I think traditionally in Ireland, we're not great at doing this. We're not great at actually asking for help. And with our physical health, we're quicker at times to do that. But with our mental health, we tend to be a little bit slow to do that. So if there was anything I could say tonight, when we're drawing to a close, it would be please realize it's okay to not be in good form. It's okay to not feel great. But it's essential and it's incredibly important to connect and ask for help. So whether that's talking to a family member or a good friend, but certainly don't be afraid to connect in with mental health. Mental health services are not what they used to be many, many years ago when I first started. There's so much more that we are aware of from a neuroscience perspective now about mental health, that we can have simple cognitive or even sometimes behavioral changes, or that create wellness, you know, that create tools to do things that will make us feel better. But of course, we can go directly to our GPs or to our mental health services and connect in and ask for some assistance. I think that's the message I would definitely like to get across tonight to people. It's okay to not feel great, but please do ask for help.
Okay, Stuart, thank you. We're getting a few messages in of thanks and appreciation, but no further questions. So I'd just like to extend on behalf of Edmondstown and our members, thank you very much for joining with us tonight. Very useful, and I hope our members will take something of that and be able to cope with the next 2 to 3 weeks, when hopefully the golf course will open again, and it will be the last time we'll be closed under this this pandemic, if the vaccine comes through, as we all hope it will. I'll just leave you that I mentioned at the beginning that we will have another presentation. We have it penciled in for the 26th, Thursday the 26th of November. We hope to get on Professor Terence Dooley of the History of Maynooth University and Director of the Centre for Study of Historic Irish Housing Estates. And he's going to come on and give a talk about the history of golf in Ireland. I know our last history presentation, which was done live and in person, obviously, before all this kicked off, was very popular. So hopefully you can all join us for that in a couple of weeks' time. But again, Stuart, thank you very much for joining us this evening. And I'm sure our members can contact you if they need any further information.
Thanks so much. Thank you so much, Mark. And listen, thanks to everybody for listening in this evening. Hope things keep well and safe for you. God bless.
Good night, everyone. Good night, Stuart.